This is Mitch, and I'm in charge of week 8, or not week 8, chapter eight's forum on identity. So the first half of the chapter, which I won't be covering, is all about self-concept and your personality and all those there's a bunch of traits that I found really interesting. So if you haven't for whatever reason, I think that the first half of this chapter is very, very interesting and it's worth the read. So I'd recommend that to start off with. What I will be covering is three major concepts, uh, mainly, or just to name them, is Marcia's model of identity formation, Seller's model of collective identity, and stereotype threat. So there's a lot of information here that comes right out of the lectures, particularly number 2 and number 3 for this week. Um, if I'm a little quiet, I'm not feeling too great, so I'll try not to cough or anything like that. But I guess I'll just get right into it. So the first big idea is Seller's model of collective identity, and the idea behind this is we at our core, like in you, the center, like the pit of your fruit that is your personality, is who you really are. And then around the outside is like maybe your gender or your sexuality. And then further outside of that would be like your race or your ethnicity, something that even more people are a group of. And then the outside rind, like of your fruit, the part that's peeled away that isn't really a big part in our society, is that we're all humans. So the idea is the deeper that we go, the more different that we are. And in different times in history, we will run into situations where it doesn't matter that I'm necessarily white, but it does matter that I'm a male. Or it doesn't matter that I'm a male, but it matters that like I have a certain interest, or I might be European, but I have German, so it keeps getting condensed. And the idea from collective identities is how our groups, from broad to specific, really determine what our identity is. So the big thing is that it changes historically. So like there are times when it doesn't matter, but then later it does. And so my example of this would be during World War II, before Pearl Harbor, before we as America were like engaged in the war, um, everyone was Americans, and that was the big deal. We're all in this like together. We're not in the war yet, but we're supporting, like Britain with all this like aid, and we hope that the Allied powers will defeat the Axis powers. And then after Pearl Harbor, our collective identities change a little bit. We're no longer all Americans and all in this together. And certain people, particularly the Japanese, it now matters that they're that level of collective identity. So they're no longer Americans. It's now we have Japanese, we have people from British descent, we have people from like anywhere that's not currently in the war. And these people who are Japanese are now, many of them, placed in internment camps, even though a few months before that their identity was still as being Americans. And the reason that they're placed into internment camps is because of fear and particularly stereotyping, which is a big issue too. So within this example, the stereotype is that Japan will do anything to win the war, so why wouldn't they just enlist spies in America 20, 30, 40 years before this point? And that stereotype leads to just horrible conditions for people and unfair treatment of Americans. And so just to kind of segue through that, for a little review on stereotype threat, it's the idea that if you stereotype someone and make your expectations known, no matter how vague or specific, it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So when you tell someone that you believe in your heart that they are going to do poorly on this upcoming test because of their skin color, because of the fact that they wear glasses, whatever it is, you give them that reason that they're going to do poorly, and they subconsciously internalize it and tend to actually do more poorly. on the upcoming exam. So the idea that your stereotypes and how you act with people like really determines how they function. It's really, really interesting. Kind of like you're told that you're going to fail because of a reason that you don't think matters, but you're still told you're going to fail, and you're more likely to fail now because you've been told that way. So yeah, so the next part that I will do is discussing a collective identity that I have that's kind of closer to like my inner personality. So if I were to move somewhere like New York or California, a collective identity is that I don't know how city life works. So I've been in a small town for my entire life. So going to cities where, you know, the whole culture is different, I can't even tell you how it's different because I don't know. So when I get there, there's culture shock on me, and people have, you know, their ingrown stereotypes about people from the Midwest, whether they're good or bad. You know, like a general one that I've heard is that people from Midwest are polite, but usually kind of dumb. Like good, like hearted, but they just don't understand. And you know, it's a stereotype, so it's obviously overarching and not like true. But going somewhere and experiencing that, if everyone's treating me kind of dumb, they may, you know, be oversimplifying like what to do and how to act, and then you do the simplified version of it and you kind of come off as someone who doesn't understand the little fine tunings of society, and you kind of come off as dumb. So that is how like a stereotype could play into that. You know, there's a lot of different examples with this. I really don't know how like I have no idea how like race would be different for me because I've never been the minority in a racial situation. But you can imagine someone who has never been the minority, like me, going into a place where they are now the racial minority and the culture is completely different. At that point, it's not even all that much to do with stereotypes. You just don't understand what's going on because people are just different. Because even though we're all humans and we all have that rind of the collective identity, our outer parts of our fruit, once you start peeling parts of it away, if you, like an orange is not the same as an apple, so you may not just understand things until you're taught about it. So collective identity in that way is really interesting and kind of scary, I guess. Like, I don't know, I just think that unknown things are a little frightening. And in times of tragedy, we tend to get closer to the roots of how people are, and then we make our differentiations and segregations of people at that time. The last major point is a thing called Marcia's identity status framework. So Marcia's identity status is the main thing to remember for like an exam, and the idea is like how sure are you of your decisions. So the way that this works is you have your level of like crisis, or like how much you've questioned your own beliefs to this point, and then you have your area of commitment, like how much you're all in with. So with this program, like the whatever major you're in, if someone came by and offered you a job that would pay relatively the same and not require you to have schooling, are you really committed to this program? Is the way to think of commitment. Like how many of your chips are on the table? And the level of crisis isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just, have you ever really stopped and thought about like what you believe in terms of religion, or what you believe in terms of politics, or even morality? It's all that conflict, and once you've gone through conflict, you can then finally go back and reflect on your original beliefs and see if you want to keep them. There's nothing about crisis or conflict that says you have to change your beliefs. It's just saying that you've actually thought of it from a subjective and objective place. So Marcia's model basically starts with, are you committed to what you're doing? And if you are committed to what you're doing, have you had crisis to reaffirm that? And there's 4 big terms. So the first one is that you have identity achievement, which means you've gone through crisis and you're still sticking to what you're doing. You're still committed. All your chips are still on the table. You've thought about it. Your identity is achieved. You know who you are, and you know that you know. You then have people who have gone through crisis but are not committed at the end. They aren't sure yet. They still aren't all in. They haven't taken their chips out. They're just not sure yet. And those people have a term called moratorium, which means that they're still kind of soul searching. Next is people who have gone through no exploration and they haven't questioned their beliefs. And for them, their commitment, if they're still committed but they've never really thought about it, they're considered to have identity foreclosure. And that's kind of like a student who, or a kid who just kind of believes what their parents believe in. And then finally, you have people who have not explored anything. They've never had a crisis, and they aren't committed to anything. They're just kind of living, and they've never really thought about it. They're not really concerned, and those people have what's called identity diffusion, and that's really concerning when you look at someone who's supposed to be self-sufficient. So like a 23-year-old or a 25-year-old. It's not really concerning in a 14-year-old. I apologize for my phone going off. And finally, how I'm going to wrap up is I interviewed a friend of mine named Rahul about, you guys will see all the questions, but it's about like his religious beliefs, his political beliefs, where he's come from. And the I think the goal is to see how I would rate him in terms of having like achievement, foreclosure, identity, and diffusion. And I would say that he is achieved in his identity. For example, the main part that reached out to me was that he is an atheist, and he has not always been an atheist, but he really stopped and considered what he was doing. And he went against what he had been taught his entire life, and it took him a lot of soul searching, according to him. But he said that he had always had doubts, and he wanted to figure out the world from his own eyes. So I believe that that's going through conflict and coming out the other end, and he's still committed to what he's wanting to do. He's in his 4th year of college, and another term of conflict is he changed his major from bioengineering to public health, and his reasoning for it was because instead of wanting to be a doctor, he wants to help people who can't necessarily afford healthcare. So that shows to me a lot of social competence and self-awareness, and really understanding what he wants to do. And within these 2 different forms of conflicts, whether it's changing his major or changing his entire belief system, I believe that he's shown that he's gone through conflict, and he is still committed as he is working towards a degree for 2 years now. So ultimately, you guys should be interviewing someone with questions similar to this, whether they're a college student or employed or a high school student. And hopefully you guys can ask me some questions or give me some feedback. If there's anything that's unclear, please let me know. Yeah. Sorry that this video is a little too long. It's just kind of hard for me to talk super quickly right now. My throat's killing me. So I hope to read all your guys' responses by Saturday night, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So have a good Veterans Day, and thank you all for watching to the end.